One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But SKYLIT is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep SKYLIT alive, please visit our website at skylitbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome back to SKYLIT, the SKYLIT Books podcast series, where we bring you all of your favorite authors near and far. We are here today with Kristen Millares Young, the author of Subduction. I'm going to read her full bio in a minute, but I just want to say hello, Kristen, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Maddie.
So Kristen is here to talk about her debut novel, Subduction. And I want to give you guys a little bit of an introduction to Kristen. So here's her bio. Kristen Millares Young is the author of Subduction, a Paris Review staff pick called Whip Smart by the Washington Post and a brilliant debut by the Seattle Times. A prize-winning journalist and essayist, Kristen serves as prose writer in residence at Hugo House. Her reviews, essays, and investigations appear in the Washington Post, Literary Hub, The Guardian, and elsewhere. Anthologized in Latina Outsiders, Remaking Latina Identity, and Pie and Whiskey, a New York Times new and noteworthy book. Her personal essays are also forthcoming in Advanced Creative Nonfiction, A Writer's Guide, and Anthology and Alone Together, Love, Grief, and Comfort During the Time of COVID-19. She was the researcher for the New York Times team that produced Snowfall, which won a Pulitzer Prize. From 2016 to 2019, she served as board chair of Investigate West, a nonprofit newsroom she co-founded to protect vulnerable peoples and places of the Pacific Northwest, which is a place that's very dear to my heart. I'm an Oregonian. Kristen, thank you for being here again. We're so excited to talk about your book today. And yeah, we've had many conversations over email, but this is our first time sort of meeting face to face, as it were, and it's so great to talk to you. You are also an events person, so I feel a kindred spirit with you. And we are so excited that we're actually going to be hosting a virtual event with you coming up in July 24th, with some special guests. So we hope everyone who listens to this episode will sign up for that on our Crowdcast page, crowdcast.io/skylitbooks. Before we get into your reading, Kristen, could you tell us who else is joining you on that event?
So we have the poet Lori Bedikian, the memoirist Brittany Ackerman, and the poet Alexandra Teague. Brittany and Lori are locals to LA, and Alexandra is someone who, like me, was going to be flying in from the Pacific Northwest. She has a book coming out, or has just come out, called Or What We'll Call Desire by Persia Books. And she's a former Stegner Fellow and teaches at the University of Idaho. Someone I've met at the Centrum Port Townsend Writers Conference, which is this fantastic annual writers conference that we convene and teach and play music and write and get an improbable amount of work done, considering that we were in community for a full week. But I'm looking forward to at least seeing them in the ether, if not in person.
Yeah, it's such a good lineup, and it was your original event lineup, so I'm really glad we could bring everyone back together in cyberspace, if not in physical space. All right, so do you want to start us off with a short reading from the novel?
Sure. So this, as you mentioned, is my debut novel. It's a book that was a long time in the making. I began researching this book 15 years ago and began really in earnest in 2007, spending years researching before I began to write, in part because I felt that I had been badly educated as someone who considers herself to be a historian and had studied history extensively. I felt that though I had learned many of the immigrant narrative trajectories that were parallel to my own family's, I had not yet reckoned with the collision of that diaspora with indigeneity and the needs and concerns and histories of the peoples who preceded my family's arrival and that of so many others. So I began to explore those concerns through the paradigm of a story about a Latina anthropologist who, in the wake of a devastating betrayal by her husband and sister, drags her damage out to the Makah Nation at Neah Bay, which is a reservation on the northwest tip of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, right at the mouth of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And when I considered the ways in which Claudia, who is that protagonist, interacts with the community that she finds, I found there a series of fractals that were replicated throughout history and the troubled history of encounter that these peoples have survived and endured for hundreds of years, though they have been living and occupying that territory for millennia, which have been proven, in fact, unlike many other Native communities whose technologies, because they were based in biological materials, have been erased with the passage of time, except through oral histories and present day remakings. The Makah have a wonderful collection of artifacts that were cured in salt water in a beach, deep buried in a beach at Ozette by a landslide that occurred hundreds of years ago and kept all of their technologies hidden from the light and preserved so that they could be exhumed and cataloged and in collaboration with Makah elders, their meanings divined. So there is a very wonderful history that was led by the Makah tribe and the archaeologist, Doc Doherty, about that excavation at Ozette, whose artifacts are now being housed by the Makah Cultural and Research Center. But the fact is that this territory was right, as I said, at the mouth of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And because so many, the Russians, the Spaniards, the English, the French, were looking for a way inland, their history of contact is based often on the exploitative aims of the outsiders who came to their territory. And so all that Claudia does while in Neah Bay has these repercussions that echo throughout history, forwards and backwards. And so this are the kind of opening pages as she makes her way from where she had been living in Seattle to a stint of field research that she must conduct as an academic in order to secure tenure. The shore pulled away. Froth churned from its feet to hers. The engines hummed through her bones. From the aft deck, Claudia looked back toward the city they made home. She searched the skyline for places they had been happy. The top of the Space Needle, a waterfront park, the Ferris wheel, until her westward passage split the horizon into expanses of gray, demarcated into sea and sky by hue alone. Puget Sound opened in fathoms below the ferry. Now, Claudia left town without saying her goodbyes. Seattle was a small world. Movers must have swarmed her house to clear out Andrew's belongings in the space of one morning. The neighbors would have seen. What had they seen? She couldn't bring herself to ask whether her sister had been on site to supervise, and Claudia hid her phone in case someone felt like sending unsolicited glimpses of Maria, deciding what to take, practicing wifeliness, slipping Andrew a kiss for courage as a first box was packed. Claudia pictured Maria's thick curls, her narrow shoulders, those rounded hips. birthing hips. The broadcaster's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, cautioning passengers about unknown items and suspicious activity. It was cowardly of Andrew not to deliver the news important. Worse still, Maria. Did they think that she would handle it poorly? That Claudia was dangerous? Listening to the roar of the props, Claudia saw what her fate might have been, her body lying in the bathtub, blue and bloated, afloat. Her stomach twisted. It was more than she could take or forgive. They knew what they were doing, she thought, yet they think I deserve it. Gulls swept the boat's wake. She was surprised by how close they came, how she could see feathers tracing their sinuous curves, how they were suddenly beautiful, not the splattering scavengers they had been, but flight itself. Right now, everyone I know is stuck at a desk, and then there's me, Claudia thought, on my way back into the field. As a child in Mexico, she wanted to go somewhere, anywhere, away. She had always studied people. She never envisioned herself as an anthropologist, preferring something more dashing, like explorer. But here she was, en route to the Makah Reservation at Neah Bay, an old whaling village on the northwest tip of the lower 48, Indian country. Last year, she noticed Andrew timing her periods, his prick vanishing 10 days after she first bled, which was almost funny, because lately, she found herself wanting to be careless, to chance it. Folding up her body on her side of the bed, ovulating alone whenever she could manage it, she had made it through her 30s unscathed. And that was when they were still trying. And now she thought, I'm old. I'd have a baby with Downs if I could have one at all. I just wanted something from myself, still do, something bigger for myself, bigger than myself, bigger than all of this. I don't know how to get it without wanting it. Why couldn't he understand? Besides, what kind of man fucks his wife's sister? Claudia tilted her head to consider the inverse. What kind of wife would allow her husband to become so close to her sister that he could fall for her, fall inside of her, fill her up? Only a conniving bitch would wrap her legs around her mother-in-law. Only a conniving bitch would wrap her legs around her brother-in-law. Maria's legs were curvy. Great gams, Andrew once said. In horror of excess flesh, Claudia carved herself to gristle. Maria's thighs bloomed. Claudia imagined they would shake in sweaty reverberation during sex, a shuddering and prayerful response to the call of loin striking flank, so unlike the flat slap of muscle her own lovemaking had become. And last month, when her fingers crept between buttons to his curly nest, his hand rose to still her wayward progress. She left her arm on top of him, trying to act natural, like this was cuddling. They pretended to sleep. It took 10 minutes to amass the strength to roll onto her back and concede. It was terrible to be uneasy in her own bed. She hadn't felt that way since college. But this time, it was her husband. And having had his love and lost it, made her physically ill. A malaise so invasive, it was as though she were at altitude, her body shutting down extremities, fingertips first. She signed the papers to be done with it. He wanted out. Thank you.
It starts off with a bang.
Well, and honestly, as soon as Claudia arrives, she really should have taken a deferral, right? She could have dealt with her, she could have handled her business, but what I have found in studying so many outsiders who arrived to this territory is that they just brought all of their ish with them. And I felt that it was so interesting because so much of the trauma of contact has invariably featured the pain of the outsiders rather than the experience of those whom received them. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to show through another character who has a point of view in Subduction, whose name is Peter, was the ways in which that welcome itself, that continued welcome, suspicious though it may be, was evidence of a great belief in the possibilities for humanity. Although Peter has his own reasons, Claudia is, to his mind, unattached. And of course, we have he has returned to Neah Bay to care for his mother after a very, very long absence. that was occasioned by the disappearance and death of his father. And he's come back to take care of his mother, Maggie, who had become a hoarder and been diagnosed with dementia in his absence. And so Claudia had been working with Maggie for years prior to Peter's return. But when she comes back to that community, she comes back to this household that has been rearranged, and where her presence there now must be made palatable for two people. And in her damage, in their mutual trauma and exploitation, they begin an affair that is has very long-lasting repercussions, given the work that she is there to do, and also Maggie's own hopes for her son. And so the book kind of unfolds in this triumvirate, but with Maggie, who's the mother, playing a vital role, but Claudia, it's being told through Claudia and Peter's perspectives as they alternate. And so we get to see Claudia, not as she sees herself, but as she is seen. And similarly with Peter, we see through Peter's eyes. And he's, full of the wit and humor that I have found to be so characteristic of so many of the tribal members that I have met and befriended. But he also suffers from misogyny and his being steeped in that mainstream culture since he had left his home community for so long. That filter on the world is meant to hide deep-seated insecurities and vulnerabilities. But because we do see through his eyes, we can see what lies beneath, and that misogyny and the ache and hope and hurt that also reside there. And part of what I've wanted to do by exploring both of those perspectives was to have a reckoning, really, with the ways in which our polyphonic, polylythic world unfolds many, many, many narratives that may or may not ever converge, and tracing their divergences, tracing their collisions, tracing their contradictions. To me, as a journalist, finding the story has always been not erasing the contradictions, but embracing them and exploring them. And so as a novelist, I tried to do the same.
I think that's such an interesting place to come at an immigrant story from, because, kind of the dominant narratives that we had in this country for such a long time were these unidirectional narratives. One person or a group of people leaving their home country and coming to this country, and not really much consideration for the people who are already in the country. There wasn't kind of a prevailing narrative about the exchange that happens between those cultures when they meet. So that's really interesting to me. And it sounds, from what you've said, that there's a lot of real life research that went into the making of this polyphonic novel. Could you talk a bit about how your journalism background kind of informed the writing of the novel?
Sure, yeah. Before I became a freelancer, I was a beat reporter at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was a major metro daily based in Seattle that printed from 1863 to 2009. And during my time there, my 5 years there, which kind of overlapped with the beginning of my research period for Subduction, I was always being asked to present a quote unquote objective view of a narrative which invoked so often, in the case with reporting on government malfeasance or corporate misfeasance, there are two narratives that are pitted against each other. One, the institutional line, and two, the community, right? And if you're lucky, right, if the reporter is even trying to do the basis of the job, there is a sense that there is a kind of a dueling narrative. And what I have found, though, is that communities are speak in many voices, and part of the beauty of having more space to research and to write these scenes was finding the room for the ways in which communities live in both harmony and contradiction. And I always felt that because of the impositions of that third person objective view and omniscience that I don't believe in, as a person, that there was a flattening of the actual complexity of the narratives that I was daylighting, even if it was for a common good of reversing corporate wrong or holding some elected official accountable, which I did a fair amount of. And so I wanted more room uh, to lay out these explorations, which had been so much more vital to me as a person, and that was the interiority of moving from a place of not knowing as a thinker and someone who has, as like every person does, a deep well of experience and emotions that condition each engagement or encounter, whether professional or personal, and then making space within that perspective for an examination of concerns that I share, but through the actions of a person that I do find to be deeply unethical, which is the anthropologist, Claudia. Um, it's an interesting thing being a journalist. For example, when someone decides to be interviewed by a journalist, they often call it giving an interview to a journalist, and it is that because it's a gift of intellectual property to that journalist who is under no obligation or there is no shared practice that I'm aware of within the journalism community to provide copies or transcripts of interviews that have been given. Instead, those materials become a primary source document that only the journalist has access to, and from which that person curates quotes, and which may or may not represent the complexity of thought that had been shared with them. Now, within the knowledge building that can happen beautifully, really, between an anthropologist and a community member, there have been many hard-won rights for co-ownership of that data. And so one of the things that I show Claudia doing fairly early on in the book is she has this transcript that she is going to bring to Maggie as a pretext for visiting her home. And that transcript describes an interview that had been given orally, the prior year. And Claudia is horrified reviewing the transcript by the ways in which her own line of questioning shows her the greed of her aims, which are the extraction of deeply held tribal secrets in the forms of songs and the meaning of those songs that Maggie has. And so Claudia begins to doctor this transcript to try to erase her tricks, and she does it with a sense of revulsion, but she does it, and for me, that was not just the beginning of the signaling, but that was a very hard scene to write because it contradicted something I believe in so deeply, that is that interlocutors or any person who converts an oral history to a transcript or a documented form needs to pay very close attention to maintaining the accuracy of that exchange. And yet it also speaks to that which every community that was not based in written form knows, which is that the earliest erasures and violence that is done against a community often comes in the form of documents that purport to represent that community, whether those be treaty documents, whether those be anthropological field notes, whether they be news articles. These are all kind of a series of documents that I allude to within the text itself, which does, I don't want to make it sound like it's a hodgepodge of field notes. It's a very lyric book. I rewrote it like 15 times at least, and reading it out loud and really looking for the cadence of each line. But I think that it's important to always draw attention to this meta-narrative, which is through the character of this extremely damaged and damaging anthropologist, invoking a meta-awareness of the problematics of the intention of this novel even. and always roping it back in to make that examination plain on the page was the way that I kind of handled ethically being an outsider trying to come to this reckoning with the history of indigeneity and diaspora in this country. And that those kinds of explorations, I don't care how many thousands of words you're given within a journalistic inquiry, they do require, it seems, a novel length. And so I was grateful that Red Hen Press helped me, which is a Pasadena-based indie press, familiar, I'm sure, to many of your Los Angeles listeners and beyond. I was grateful that Red Hen Press saw the value in this telling and helped me bring it into the world.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to highlight is that fiction has no claim to objectivity, right? And that allows you a kind of freedom to be honest about your position as the teller, and your protagonist's position as morally compromised. Like, yes, I think it makes a lot of sense that with these kinds of investigations, you turn to fiction rather than trying to do some kind of major journalistic project. Could you talk about kind of the ways that you used your nonfiction research in the crafting of the actual plot of the book, and like, what did you find useful in terms of your journalism skills, and what did you find to be kind of detrimental or to hold you back from writing the fiction you wanted to write?
Well, it's certainly true that in the process of trying to bring the book to market through agents and editors, I received a lot of pressure to make these characters more empathetic by making them, in my mind, a bit less human. So there were exhortations to freshen the anthropologist, because she is not an ingenue. You know, she's a woman firmly in her midlife. There were pressures to adhere more to a kind of white savior narrative in which her presence would be a positive catalyst for change that didn't at the same time create an almost in the ways that trees' roots will often map and match the span of the branches, the damage that this anthropologist causes and enacts are matched by the scope of what she is able to accomplish to help this family towards its own goal of cultural preservation across generations. And so, you know, one thing that journalists aren't often is self-indicting, but all of my favorite essayists are. And in fact, I find it to be one of the true values of literary fiction is that there is room for that continual erosion of doubt, and which is very fertile territory for any exploration. And fiction provides us with the possibility to examine. I'll say that fiction provides us with the opportunity to examine why it is that we hurt each other so much. And when I think about James Baldwin, his essay, The Creative Process, really helped me throughout the framing of this book. He said that if we understood ourselves better, we might damage each other less. And so what I have seen often with journalists invoking their institutional authority, that there is not enough questioning of who the story is serving. Many people will do something in service of the story as though the story itself were more than the people that it involves. And I'm not sure that that's true. I also found as a journalist, I had been, as I said, encouraged to kind of ventriloquize through this third person omniscience. What that did, it did give me institutional authority at a time when I was probably too young to be taken seriously by any of the maritime folks that I was investigating. I was, the youngest reporter at the paper, Latina, in a space that was very white and very old, very male. But that objectivity, quote unquote, that third person lens also occasioned an erasure of my own embodied wisdom as a woman, as a Latina. And that erasure is something that is demanded of very many people who come to professional life having diverse experiences in their personal lives, that they're asked to blot out or essentially exclude from the frames of reckoning, as though that were possible. And in so doing, often maintain a white supremacist mentality, because of course the omniscience and the institutional authority and the quote unquote objectivity that is in fact a very detailed control of narrative are all elements of these systems of oppression, which have been foisted on many communities throughout this country and abroad, of course. And so getting out of that and realizing part of that's what Claudia is grappling with is the losses, the racial grief that she has experienced in her long trajectory toward whiteness in this country. And, you know, she came at a time when assimilation was the task for all new immigrants, when there was not as much support for and recognition of the value of difference. And it's my hope that her grappling the sense of loss that you can see in her character as she interacts with people who do still have a sense of community, she having sacrificed that kind of closeness and intimacy in favor of a career, which seems to be kind of the brass ring of being an American, right? You can have a real career. You know, you may have hated your life your entire life, you know, but you had a career, you know. And I'm always so amazed, you know, at the point of retirement, how often people will like leave the communities where they've been or like start an entirely new life, you know, in part because there was a failed promise of recognition, and that with that recognition would come a sense of belonging. And what they find instead is a tremendous sense of dislocation. And Claudia, as a character, bears that dislocation with her wherever she goes. And she does it both as an American and as a Latina. And then she, in many ways, reproduces the damage in others because of the lack of understanding that she has had with her own process.
Is your hope with this novel that readers might go through the same kind of reckoning that Claudia goes through, or learn from her mistakes or otherwise?
Well, certainly there's a sense that, you know, the things that she does are things that many people do. Many people, when they are retelling a conversation, will reshape the narrative so that it favors their goodness, right? They tell a story of their own goodness, which preserves their sense of self-worth and basically make superfluous any effort that they might make to improve or understand the situation that they're facing. And so it is my hope that by watching Claudia flail, she's been following all of these parameters that have been set up for her by the dominant society, and yet none of them have served her. You know, the life that she built is not really a life that she wants, you know. And, you know, and often same thing with Peter. You know, Peter's been told a story about material acquisition and freedom, you know, that belied the intense loneliness that marks all the decades that he was away from his community. And though Peter, because he is funnier and a bit looser in some ways, you know, he is not so uptight as Claudia. He can be someone who, you know, elicits our empathy more, also because most people have more empathy for male characters than they do for female characters. There's this whole trope of the unlikable, you know, woman within literature, and she and her creators remain pariahs, you know, despite the truth of the matter, which is that we all do need to learn from the mistakes that people make. And it is more, to me, literature creates a safe space for that kind of private reckoning, where rather than being kind of your spot blown up by your family member, about what you said at dinner, and how that affected them, and you having, people getting defensive about that and getting into an argument, you can have that kind of quiet survey of the self, which allows for, hopefully, some positive change. So, and any reader who hears this podcast and reads the book and wishes to connect with me about it, very happy to answer questions, maybe at the July 24th reading, or via my website, kristenmyoung.com, or on Twitter or Instagram, at Kristen Millares is my handle. And I do check out people who follow me and do attend to my messages and whatnot. But it's been hard to, in some ways, have the conversations that I wanted to have with this book, because it did come out during a pandemic. And yet I've had very far-ranging conversations with people all over the world about this book. And I'm grateful for the ways that technology has enabled that to happen despite social distance.
Well, thank you for bringing the conversation to us today. I'm really fascinated by kind of all of the missions of this novel and everything, all of the experiences you brought to it. I'm very excited to hear you talk more about it at the virtual event, and I have more questions, but I think this is a great place to end things for now. Kristen, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for creating community in the ether. I'm glad to be part of it.
Yes, we're all hanging out sort of amorphously here. All right, well, thank you all for listening. Our guest today was Kristen Millares Young, author of the novel Subduction. She'll be appearing virtually on Crowdcast with several other fantastic writers on July 24th, so we hope to see you there.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.